Hi everyone, Jason here from Instruo. I wanted to give some sound examples and a bit of an overview of the ins and outs of my new complex oscillator, the CSL. You can see from the layout here, it's two horizontally positioned oscillators, each with volt per octave, FM, which could be linear, exponential, coarse, fine, frequency adjust, a range of individual waveform outputs, and some timbre controls. So you can see each voice itself has its own final output, which is controlled from these faders for the inbuilt wavefolders. Each wavefolder also has a symmetry offset control, CV over the waveform depth, and via this index bus here in the middle, you can use that for controlling a lot of internal routing for frequency modulation, timbre modulation, PWM, etc. I'll go through and give a few examples of different routings. So let's start with the top voice here and look at some of the raw waveforms. So the sine wave output, triangle, sawtooth. You can see on the top and bottom knobs here, each voice has its own PWM output. The top one is the more traditional variable duty cycle. CV and over control of that. There's also the ability to cross-modulate them internally via the two oscillator sine waves as the modulation signal. Let's take a quick look here at the wavefolder. Setting the symmetry. You see with the symmetry offset, there's a lot of range of control over the overtone makeup by just shifting the sine wave's DC bias. Now let's go down to the lower oscillator. This is actually a triangle core circuit as opposed to the top one, which is a sawtooth core circuit. I went for one of each just to sort of keep the best of both worlds. The triangle core I find keeps the triangle shape a lot cleaner all the way up the full frequency range, which when shaping to a sine wave, same thing happens, so it ends up with a very clean sine wave with less risk of artifacts from any notches that can occur when folding a triangle from a sawtooth wave. That's the triangle wave. The PWM voice for this oscillator is a little bit different. As you can see, it's this double pulse shape, which is used by a couple of comparators against the original triangle form. I find sonically it's a little bit softer, less aggressive than classic duty cycle, but definitely very, very usable, very versatile. And lastly, the wavefold output. Oh, I missed one. Here we are, the square wave. So the square wave on the lower voice has a button here for selecting one sub-octave or 2 octaves below sub. So if you're using this as for summing different output waveforms together at a mixer, the ability to mix in a sub-octave can be very useful. You may spot that the original octave square wave signal is slightly DC offset. There is a reason for that. I'll come to that later. It was kept in as to give the ability of an additional waveform that can be created from the multiply stage. So I'll come back to that. And back to the wavefolder. You'll notice that as the fader is brought all the way down, it actually silences the waveform. Changing the symmetry, you can see it moves the offset which follows the wave folding pattern. So this is done by the fader actually controls an exponential response VCA, which allows when it's closed completely, it allows for CV to be used to control the amplitude and folding. So if I patch in a simple, a quick decay envelope into the CV input, bring up the attenuator, have the ability to essentially strike the wavefolder and get that classic percussive plucked sound. The symmetry offset allows for a wide range of overtone makeups of the timbre, I feel. This can also be used in reverse if the wavefolder is in the on position to begin with. The attenuator, you can very envelopes or any CV can be very quickly scaled and inverted to control the wavefold depth. Okay, so let's dive into some cross modulation between the two voices. I'll listen to the lower oscillator and use that as my carrier. And I'm now modulating it, frequency modulating it with the top voice. So by default, the two sine waves are mapped to the FM inputs of the opposite oscillator. So by simply bringing up the attenuators, you're able to directly control the FM index. Setting them to exponential, of course, gives a lot more aggressive modulation. And with this happening simultaneously between the two, you get the complex crossover between FM of one voice to the other simultaneously. And of course, if something more subtle is desired, you could always use linear FM as a control, set the modulator to LFO range. Lots of capabilities of timbres, and that's just with the direct levels of the sine waves controlled by the attenuators. So for more dynamic control over frequency modulation, I can use the index control here, which is this pot, a CV input with a attenuator, and you can see there's a there's a button here which actually functions as a shift button. So if I hold that down, I'm able to use the remaining 6 buttons to toggle on or off different routing. So the way this functions, you can think of the 2 sine waves going through VCAs controlled by the index controls, and then the ability to switch them in or out of different destinations between the 2 voices. So the potential destinations are the FM inputs. So you could have FM through VCAs to the sine waves through VCAs to the destination FM inputs, or you can send them to, well, all these can be simultaneous. So you could have it going to the symmetry offset controls, or the wavefold depth controls. So the way that you assign these, the outer 4 buttons match up to the 4 wavefold controls here. So if I hold this down, enable that, it means that this sine wave goes through this VCA to the wavefold control. By pressing the button, you can quickly see what the routing state is. The remaining 2 buttons map to the 2 FM inputs. So if I want to do cross FM controlled from the single index, I will hold this down and enable these 2 buttons. So now if I bring this guy up, listen to our sine wave again, and set that to exponential just so it's a bit more immediately noticeable. The knob's all the way down, so it means that this sine wave is through a muted VCA to the FM input. And this is happening because I enabled both these buttons. This is happening simultaneously of both sine waves through VCAs to the FM inputs. And with the CV attenuverter, you can get a lot of control over envelopes. So that's using the index control for routing to frequency modulation. I'll show it controlling the oscillators, modulating the different timbre controls of the wavefolders. So if we listen to the lower oscillators wavefolder, imagine the 4 buttons mapping up here. If I hold the center one, enable this, I'll disable the FM for now, turn those down. I now have this sine wave through this VCA to the symmetry offset. So this now essentially becomes a modulation input with attenuverter. I'll set this to LFO just now so we can use it as more of a true modulation source. You can see in the oscilloscope as the sine wave is oscillating at low frequency, I've got the attenuverter up quite high, and I've got control over the depth of that from the index. So for very rich bass pads, this becomes very useful. And of course this is running at LFO mode. The beauty of this method of summing, if I use an audio rate signal, so now I'll use this sine wave through the VCA to the symmetry offset. You can see now, as I bring up the index, I'm getting what I'd expect from a typical wavefolder control. However, this is now the top oscillator that we're hearing. So we now have this sine wave through a VCA going into this wavefolder. So we're effectively summing two sine waves amplitudes at the same destination, which is at the point of a wavefolder. So what I'll do, I'll bring this up to a reasonably rich level. And the complexity in waveforms that you get from summing two sine waves before a waveform is quite dramatic. As an alternative, I could switch over the modulation routing to control the waveform depth, and this can be done at audio rate, of course. Very different waveform result compared to the summing at the symmetry point. And this of course can happen simultaneously, so if I enable both. And this of course is happening simultaneously between the two oscillators wavefolders. So at any point I could just patch into the top one, set the same form of routing. So either voice can be treated as the primary, as the carrier signal, or both simultaneously. You could patch these out to a mixer and listen to both together, be sequencing both simultaneously from alternate sources or geophonic sequences. Of course, we can mix back in levels of frequency modulation. for very textural atonal stuff. It's a lot of versatility with no patch cables at all, other than the single output. So let's look at a few other ways that the CSL can be used for sequenced, or for tuned voices. I have a sequence running here, which I'll send to the lower voice. If I go back to the trick of summing the two sine waves together, so if I enable this one, we're listening to this sine wave through this wavefolder as I bring up the index. The top sine wave is being controlled via VCA summing at the symmetry point. Now, if I want to track both oscillators together in unison, all I need to do is hit the link button, and that will take, if there's a single volt per octave signal patched into either one, it will be shared between the two oscillators. So here with the two oscillators tracking together, and I'm mixing them in together at the wavefolder. And here there'll be points where you have them at perfect intervals, either octaves or perfect fifths, perfect fourths, where they'll settle into something that's very harmonically stable. Here, because there are two analog oscillators tracking together, tuned at a unison, or whatever the interval happens to be, there's still a little bit of phasing between the two voices. This can be solved with the sync controls. The bottom voice, the triangle core, its sync input is soft sync, so it's designed for frequency lock, or for following simultaneous frequencies with another oscillator. The top core, the sawtooth core, is hard sync, which will work even in LFO mode. A trigger or a gate will force a reset in the waveform. If I hit the sync button, lit once, when it's amber, this is the lower voice soft synced to the top. So here it's now much easier to find points where the harmonics line up. Once more, the top voice is now hard synced to the bottom. So now turning the coarse frequency adjust of the top voice as it's hard locked to the lower one, we now retain even more consistent waveform phase relationships. It now acts as a timbre control over the, almost like an overtone, like formant series. So now we have the same configuration, a sequence going to the volt per octave on the lower oscillator, the link enabled so they're both tracking simultaneously. You can now hear that distinctive hard sync, those hard sync artifacts coming through. If I hold routing and now send it to the symmetry, and I have this clocking oscillator sine wave frequency through the VCA summing with the synced sine wave at the wavefolder. That was me bringing up the exponential FM input, so the top oscillator is now also being frequency modulated by the lower, but as they're hard synced, as the top one is hard synced to the bottom, it acts as an additional timbre control for creating more complexity to the waveform. Enable that, I now have this depth controlled by the index as well. Add one more control. So I now have the sine wave through the VCA controlling the wavefold depth simultaneously as well. Let's look at the remaining cross-modulation options that we have. So this is listening to the lower voice's PWM output, and you can see the modulation is now being done by the top voice in LFO mode. That's with the mod button pressed once. When it's white, we have the sine wave signals that are VCA controlled going to the opposite oscillator's PWM voice. If I take this out of LFO, we can now see the duty cycle controlled by the lower oscillator here. One more press and it's amber. That means the lower one is controlled by the top only. Back to LFO. With the index control, this allows for a lot of range in modulation depth as well as the modulation frequency independently. Bring in some FM. And now, last but not least, the CSL also includes an amplitude modulation stage, labelled by the multiplier output. Single depth control here. These are actually the two inputs of the amplitude modulation control. By default, it's full four-quadrant ring modulation, the top option there, which is indicated by the LED being unlit. So as these are just general patchable inputs, there is also the ability to send in any control signal. So if I send just a CV input into the lower one, it can be treated immediately as a VCA over the opposite sine wave. Or if you have two completely independent signals, they could be patched in and the ring modulator can be utilized entirely, separate from the rest of the CSL. Here we can see some classic ring modulation pulsing. With the press of this button, there are three different amplitude modulation types. Unlit is full four-quadrant ring modulation. Single press and we're in AM. This removes any of the negative curve from a sine wave, so instead of the full cycle you have just the positive pulses, which gives you these spread out pulses that we can see in the scope. One more and it rectifies the negative voltage in the modulating signal. So it rectifies up, so you end up with like the double positive bump. The result is that at the press of a button you get three very, very distinctive AM tones. So by default, it's the two sine waves that are connected, that are normalized to the inputs, but very, very easily you can just patch from the final of one in. Multiplying the two final outputs of the two voices. Let's go cross FM. So as a last bonus trick, earlier I mentioned the shape of the lower output square wave, where the original octave is slightly DC offset. The reason for this is so that if the multiplier output is used, where we now hear the lower sine wave is patched in here. If I take the square wave signal, run it into the opposite end, set it to rectified, I'm now multiplying the sine wave with the rectified version of a slightly DC offset square wave. The resulting waveform you can see is this sort of split sine. On an FFT, this will give the approximate outline of fundamental and then all the even harmonics, so kind of the spectral inverse of a square wave. So, just a bit of an Easter egg to try and cover all bases and include as many different waveforms as possible. There's bound to be something I'm missing, but hopefully that gives a good overview of some of the sonic capabilities of the CSL. They're available now. I'm currently building the initial batches by hand, but as production scales up, they'll be becoming more and more readily available. Any questions, feel free to send an email or message through the website, instruomodular.com. Yeah, just come by and say hi. Thanks for watching.